I don't think that's right. That works. Okay. Right, I think I've got that working. Oh, the things you have to learn. Okay. Is that working for everybody? If not, what I might do is I'll just do a recording of it and then I'll just upload it to watch later. Anybody there? Right. I have no idea if this is working or not. Right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If it doesn't work, I will have another go at doing a recording of it once we get started, when I need to re-dye it. Sorry about having to mess about with everything quite so much. This is what happens when you have to try and do brand new things. Okay, let's have a look. This may or may not be the way that I want to go about going live streams in future, but for now, it's what we've got. So first things first, let's stick some gloves on so that I don't turn my hands funky colours. And let's have a go at getting some dye. So unsurprisingly, the colour that maybe you all chose to pick was sea glass, which is, if I hold that up so that we can see, is this one. And this is how I usually do it. I'm aware that's a bit reflective, but it's the sea glass one. And it dyes, I dye off the phone screen because I'm not after exact matches, I'm after things that look vaguely similar and that give the feel of the colour palette rather than something that's an exact, this is how exactly, these colours are perfect matches for that. I generally start off with the darkest colours and make my way through to the lightest ones. The dark colours are the ones that have got the most intensity. They use the most amount of dye, and we're going to start off with, it's sort of a browny blacky colour, and it's kind of the colour that the pebbles are once they've got wet. So it's mostly black based, but there's a little bit of a brown undertone of it. So we're going to start off with the old dark brown. So these are, last time I did this, someone went, oh, I didn't get to see you use the your new dye dispensing system. So I've changed the way that I've put the video camera up to see if that works better for people. So basically these are old plastic fizzy drinks bottles that have been saved up over the past few months, and then these are optics like you have in pubs. So each time these will dispense 25 millilitres of stock solution of dye. So let's get rid of the pin that's at the bottom of that jug. I've even treated myself to some new jugs rather than the old jam jars, which I had been using for years. Let's go for, and the thing I struggled with this last time was that I really struggled with trying to remember how much dye I put in and writing it down whilst talking. So we need, I'm mostly going for dark brown. So that's 50. 75. Just about enough in here without having to make up another batch of stock solution. So that's had 100 of the dark brown that I use, and then I'm going to put 25 of black in it. Let's write that down. So 100 brown, because otherwise I can't dye it again. 25 millilitres of black. Okay. And then the way that I go about testing all the colours that I use before, if I'm after creating exact colour matches rather than dyeing on instinct, is that I use a piece of kitchen roll, and all you do is just put a few drops of the dye on the white kitchen roll, and then when you dot it onto the kitchen roll, it gives you an idea about what it's going to look like when you put it onto fibre itself. It will lighten as it dries. So we've got overall, and again, the colour doesn't come across very well on the screen, but from me working on that, I can see that's roughly where I was heading for, in that it's a very, very browny black. So that's our brown black colour. Next up, we want, I described it in the caption for the picture, I described it as being a greyed violet. So I'm going to start off with the violet dye, and even though this is technically slightly paler, I know my violet dye isn't as intense a colour as all the others, so we are just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's got the violet dye in it. We write that down. And sometimes I'll get it right first time. Sometimes I go back and I make little changes. Sometimes I discard the entire mix that I've done and go, I need to start again from scratch. That by itself is going to be far too purple. It's a really royal purple. So I'm going to put some grey dye into it. I do keep a grey dye specifically for darkening and muting colours, because it's got quite a lot of, it's quite a blue-grey. So if we have a look at that, I hold that up to the screen, we can just about see we're starting to get a hint of that grey purple colour. It's not going to be quite as dark as the browny black, and we're okay with that, because this is we've got probably in this pack, I always try to dye a mixture of darks and lights and mid-tones. That grey, the brown black is going to be our very, very dark colour. Normally I dye another dark colour, but I think in this case the greyed violet is actually going to be more like a mid-tone. So that's 100 millilitres of violet and 25 millilitres of grey. Write it down, because otherwise I end up forgetting. Now in the colour picture from the palette that I picked out, there's actually 6 colours, and I'm going to ignore the beigey colour, that's the beigey tan, because it's not particularly to me it doesn't really match the rest of the colours, and I think it's probably the colour that you probably all liked least. So that's those two. I'll put those there. Another 3 jugs. So we now need to do the sort of that proper greeny bluey sea glass colour. And this one's going to be one that I think is going to be a bit of a struggle to end up with the right shade, but we'll go with it. So when I'm just working from dyeing colours at random, I will quite often just go, I want a splash of that. But because I need to repeat it, that's not going to work for this purpose. So what we're actually going to do is I'm going to pull off 25 millilitres of this jade green, because that's going to be the main basis of our colour, but I know I don't need a full 25 millilitres of it. So this is where I still need to just measure out a more precise quantity. Let's say if I was just doing non-repeatable colours, I just use things like I want a splash of that shade rather than any particular amount. But let's go for, and this is quite a strong colour, so let's just measure out. It's going to be a syringe that refuses to play ball. Let's try and measure it out accurately so that we can repeat it for later. Let's start off with 5 millilitres of that jade. And then I think it probably needs a tiny bit of brown in it. Another one of you. So we're just going to put a tiny bit of brown, about 1 millilitre. And now I'm just going to dilute it down with some water to roughly have the same amount of liquid as it had in the larger quantities. And we're going to see where we are from there. So write that down, 1 millilitre of brown. Make sure that's not dirty. And let's have a look. A bigger dot for you to see. Okay, there we go. So I'll bring it closer this time. That, bring it up a bit. Everything's mirror imaged, and it's like, oh, that's confusing. That's probably about where we want to go for. So bear in mind that the fibre itself is slightly creamy coloured rather than this being white. So the colour is going to be slightly more yellow toned, and it's always more exaggerated on the colours like the green and things. So it's going to end up being slightly more yellow. So I think I'm happy with that as being our jaded colour. The next colour that we want is we want a bluey grey colour, and there's a little tiny hint of violet in it, a little tiny hint of mauve. So let's have this. How many measuring jugs can I use? And trying to make sure I don't get them confused. Let's have some violet. So all the bits that I don't use, I'll be carrying on dyeing for the rest of the day. So I'll use these up in more colours where I'm not concerned about making sure everything's an exact match and replica. So let's go for 5 millilitres of the violet. And then it's got some blue, it's got some grey in it, it's got a little bit of brown in it. Let's add 1 millilitre of brown. So you can see on these really pale colours, you don't need to change a lot of shades. By adding very small amounts of colour, you can change colours quite dramatically. Right, I'm going to see where I'm at before I decide what I want to add in next. So that's our colour here. And you can see we've ended up with a shade that's far too lilac, but I know it's not going to take an awful lot to turn that into something that's blue. So what I am going to do is I'm going to take some, do I want blue, do I want grey? Let's go for grey. The royal blue is a really strong, intense colour. So because this pack's got quite a lot of pale colours that are in it, it's quite a tricky one to dye and stay accurate with it. You don't have to change these colours by an awful lot to end up with something quite different. So let's add, yeah, make sure it's the right one, just the tiniest hint of the grey, because I can always go back and add more grey. 1 millilitre grey. And let's take another look at this. Quite pleased with that, actually. It's not quite the colour that's on the pack, but I think it works quite successfully with the other shades. And that's sometimes how it goes when I'm dyeing these colours, is that I don't end up, come up a little bit, I don't end up with the exact right colour. But sometimes the one that I end up making ends up being one that I really, really like. So we've gone from this purpley brown colour at the bottom all the way, and we've just added in 1 millilitre of grey, and you can see how it's changed the colour quite dramatically, and we've ended up with something that is a nice sort of grey colour. It's not quite the original blue, but I think the silvery grey shade that's the very, very lightest colour is going to end up being more blue than it is in the original. And this is how I managed to use every single jug. I have used every single jug. So that was, this is the grey. I'm going to go for 2 millilitres of the grey just by itself, as our very, very palest shade, and this is going to be bluer than it is in the original palette. So I think it's going to give me something that I'm happy with. Just how this stick's got purple on it. Let's find a clean dipping instrument. That's better. So it's going to be this colour, up, down. Tell you what, doing everything mirror image. This may not be the final version of the way we go about doing future live streams, by the way, but it's what I could get working. It's going to be that shade here, which is going to be the blue-grey colour. Right, let's put these on some fibre so that you can see what they look like on the fibre. And then it's always interesting to see what they look like once I come to take the photos. So those are all my dud bits and pieces. Let's move the notepad over there. Let's move my phone over there before I chuck liquid on it. Just lost the pen. Let's go for putting some dye on some fibre. So I'm pretty happy with those colours. If need be, I can always, once I put the dye on the fibre, I'm still not happy with it, I just measure out another chunk of fibre and remix the colour. So this has just been in soak overnight with water with a little bit of washing up liquid, and I've just squeezed it nearly completely dry. And we're just going to lay it out on the table. Let's move those over so that you can see. So even the semi-solid colours, I dye in a low water method because it means that the fibre stays much better quality than trying to do it with any other method. Okay, so this is our dark browny blacky colour. That's the sort of the pebbles on the beach once they're wetted, and we're just going to distribute the dye evenly throughout the fibre. I always joke when I teach dyeing workshops, if you dye, you don't need to go to the gym. You certainly don't need to do arm days. So I'm just pushing the dye down and in, so it's not a rubbing motion, it's just nice and flat. Dry my hands off, otherwise everything gets smeared in dye. And then we're going to add our citric acid to get the dye to stick onto the fibre, and I always put that on right at the end, just because with some fibres it's really helpful to try and make sure that the dye distributes evenly and doesn't start to bond onto the fibre until you've got everything exactly where you want it. So that's colour 1, which is the dark browny black. Out of the way, clean off the table. This roll of cling film is nearing its end and the box is falling to bits. Let's have colour 2. So again, we've laid that out. So this is the purpley bluey colour that's going on. So you can see I told you it was going to end up being really quite a blue shade. And that's exactly what we've ended up with once it's gone on the fibre. Dripping dye everywhere. There we go. So it's quite nice. It's sort of one of those in-betweeny colours. Let's just make sure we've got no pale bits. And our citric acid. Roll that up in there and just wipe off the mess. That's colour 2. As I say, this box is dying a death. Yeah. So this is all on the Cambrian Wool base, which is, it's a cross between the Blueface Leicester and the Welsh Mountain that we get around here. So it's a good combination between hardiness and large size sheep. So it's quite often the first generation cross that's done, and most of the offspring are then sent off to market once they've reached full size to go to the meat market. But their first year fleeces are really, really lovely. They have a lovely long staple length, really nice open crimp. It's quite often the same type as will often be sold as Blueface Leicester. It's got a nice shine to it. It's sturdy without being scratchy. It's a good jumper yarn, but you can also use it. You can put it around your neck and not go this prickles. So as you start to move on to dyeing the paler colours, they start to be harder to get the colour to be evenly saturated throughout. So this was our sea glassy greeny colour, and you can see how it's looking slightly more green now. It's on the slightly yellower fibre. It's a nice pale colour, so I'm quite pleased with that one. So hopefully when it comes out of the dye pot, well, out of the oven from being heat set, it's still a colour that I'm happy with. Ooh, a little bit tight on the cling film. So these just get wrapped up in the minimalist amount of cling film that I can manage, but it just holds all the dye and all the liquid in place before it gets heat set. It stops the colours mixing and mingling together. It means that the fibre sort of steams in its own little packet. I might need a new roll of this. I've become expert film wrangler. I couldn't get this brand for a very brief point of time, and bought a different type, and it was really thin and it was a nightmare. It's slopped everywhere, and it's just stuck to itself. You try to be pulling it out the box and you just end up with this massive fibre that you couldn't lay out flat on the table. So I ended up wasting so much of it, and in the end I gave it to a friend who keeps pigs and sheep, and she's going to use it for wrapping up her meat in smaller quantities. So this one, what colour is this one? This might have been, oh, this is the bluey purpley colour. This is the paler blue colour. It might still be a little bit purple. We'll see once I've got it on the fibre. Oh no, that's going to be okay. It's really hard judging dye in, particularly the paler colours, when you're looking at them in the pots and similar. So as I poured this on, it looked like it was going to be really, really purple. And it's actually going to be a lovely, nice, silvered grey with a bit of blue and purple undertones. But we just need to work a bit to get the dye evenly situated all throughout the fibre, particularly at the ends. So because I've been doing this for so long now, I've got pretty good at going, I need to use this, this and this, and that's going to give me the sort of colour that I'm aiming for, and particularly because I'm never trying to do an exact colour match, and I know my dyes really, really well as to what colour they will produce in what quantities and in what combination. But it's taken years to get to that stage. So it's one of those, the more you practice. the easier it gets. There we go. So yeah, so I will have we'll have another go at doing this come August. Maybe by August I'll find a method that actually really works, and won't require a certain amount of me going, oh, that's not doing what I thought it was going to do. Because I feel like everything with this job, you have to become a tech expert. Very, very quickly. Right, one last colour, but yeah, so maybe by August it will actually be a seamless operation. But I was thinking back to sort of summer 2020, which was the first time I started trying to do all this sort of stuff online, and going, I don't quite know how to do any of this. And I practiced with my own guild. We had all our guild meetings moved online, and we were using Skype of all things because it was the thing that we all knew how to use. And we just worked it out, how to set up cameras and everything else. And because it was just with my guild, it didn't really matter if it wasn't perfect. And then, of course, since then, once I've kind of got happy and confident and worked out how to set things up, it was much easier to then go, right, now I can actually start charging people to do this. So it's always my one comforting factor of that I might have wasted some of your time, but I haven't charged you anything for it. So it's not horrendous if it all goes badly wrong. So this is the very, very pale silvery grey, and this is always the tricky part of dyeing pale colours, is that it's really, really blotchy at the moment. So you've got real pale patches, and I don't mind a bit of variation in these, but we are going for semi-solid rather than variegated. And because there's so little dye to change the colours of these, it's really hard to get nice, even coverage. You have to work sort of quite hard to spread it all out. So as you can see, this grey dye is actually, it's quite a bluey colour rather than a shade which is a true grey. Black and grey dyes are always quite funny because they're never actually a true black or a grey. Blacks tend to either be a very, very dark purple, a very dark green, or sometimes a very, very dark blue. And the one I use is a very, very dark purple. Once you start to dilute it right down, you get a pale mauvey colour out of it. So that affects how it interacts with other colours. And the grey is the same. It looks quite grey, but it's quite a steely grey. And that means that you end up with something that looks almost a pale blue once you start to mix it up. So let me bring these over. Right, the sausages of fibre, and chuck them on the floor. Let's have a look at what we've got. Okay, the light might reflect badly off these, but here's the colours that we've got. So as you can see, we've gone for an interpretation rather than a strict, this is what we've ended up with. So this is our browny blacky colour. This is our purpley greyed mauve colour. This one's looking quite purple at the moment, but I think it's going to end up being a little bit more grey. This is our proper greeny sea glass colour. Now, I'm quite pleased with that one. That's a really nice colour that it's come out as. This is our bluey purpley grey. And then this is the very, very palest grey. And I'm going to move these because I'm dripping all over the floor. So the packets are roughly tight rather than perfectly tight. They work fine providing that gravity is not draining all the dye to one end of them. So these are going to go onto a tray, and they're going to go into my brand spanking new fan oven, and they'll sit and they will heat set until all the dye has been absorbed. Then they get rinsed in water with hot water with detergent. They'll go in the spin dryer. They'll hang up to dry. they should be up in the online shop for the end of the week, ready for the beginning of July. And then if these all sell out, I'll have another go at dyeing some more. So hopefully they're going to end up being the colour that they like, that remind us of that sea glass palette in a interpretive sort of way. And we'll see what we end up dyeing for August, and we'll have another go doing it in August. And maybe by August I'll have worked out how to get everything doing in a seamless manner rather than a oh dear, that's not quite worked. So thanks for sticking with me. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I shall see you all in August, hopefully.